source and giver of life. Amen.
Amen.
No one ever said that when I was being ordained that a necessary part of being a priest was would be to act as Sherlock Holmes. Not with the pipe and the deerstalker hat, but to act as a detective, to follow clues, to come to a conclusion based on evidence you uncover, and on what you can reasonably figure out from that evidence. In a mystery story, such as the Holmes ones, there's the surface story. How things seem to be at first blush. That's the first part of the book. And then the detective starts digging behind it, looking for motives, looking for clues, things you don't easily see on the surface. Of course, there's a great tradition of mixing detective stories and clergy. There was Dorothy Sayers, who was a great weaver of the classic detective yarns, Lord Peter Wimsey. But these people were also dedicated, committed Anglican Christians. And P.D. James, perhaps you've seen her in the shelves. This one is called, interestingly enough, Death in Holy Orders. Bestseller. And I heard her speak, interestingly enough, at Trinity College downtown Toronto. She was definitely coming from the Anglican Christian tradition. Peter Robinson, a prolific mystery writer, is the son-in-law of an Anglican priest whom I knew personally. Discipleship detectives. So what's the connection? Where's the tie-in? It's called biblical studies. Study of the Bible, the kind of examination of the different books of the Bible with a searching eye that I spent several years of my life studying with learned professors whose doctorates were Oxford and Cambridge, Harvard and Yale, very serious scholars, very, very serious detectives. For at its heart, the highly developed study and analysis of the biblical literature, as it's been pursued in the finest schools of the world over the last century or two, has all the characteristics, well, almost all the characteristics of a great detective story. Probably the writers juice it up a bit, but there's the surface story, how things seem to be at first glance. That is, reading the Bible just as it reads, just as it stands, like we do in church. Take, for instance, our readings this week and next from the Gospel of Luke. This is a series of teachings reported to be by Jesus, very challenging sayings, delivered, the writer tells us, on the plain, surrounded by a great crowd. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor. Now, wait a minute. Those words do sound kind of familiar. Haven't I heard something like that before? The Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount? Sermon on the Plain. Could Jesus have done much the same thing twice? And they each got told of the different ones, or two different events, or is there something else going on here? Has as Sherlock would say, "Come, Watson, the game's afoot."
Yeah.
Afoot indeed. The book I'm holding in my hand, let's see, how many pages? Well, there's almost 200 pages in here, and it's called Gospel Parallels. It contains thousands and thousands of parallels, some exact, some rough, extracted from the first three Gospels. The Gospels we know by the names Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or in their chronological order, earliest to latest, Mark first, Mark appearing around the year 70 in the Christian era, then Matthew around 85, and Luke around 90 or so. Well, scholars will differ a little bit, but there's no question there's quite a gap between the events of Jesus' life and the appearance of the Gospels. So Mark, about 40 full years after the death of Jesus, Matthew 55 years, Luke 60 years. Lots and lots of these parables, these three books, are definitely closely related. There is, of course, a fourth gospel called John's Gospel, but very different from these three from this three gospel tradition. Very different portrayal of Jesus. Very different stories and teachings. Some Bibles have a analysis like that with John left in, and John's Gospel is all by itself. There's no parallels in the other three. I doubt you could get more than a little pamphlet of even rough parallels from comparing John with the three Gospels. So, our mystery primarily involves three accounts of Jesus, three Gospels. So let's call in our detectives, our biblical scholars. I don't imagine any of them have Belgian accents and funny little mustaches like Hercule Poirot. But certainly they have as many little gray cells as the Belgian detective. Most are called Reverend Doctors, and they publish in scholarly journals. So, what is their general consensus about this curious similarity? These Gospels, these three, have received the name Synoptic Gospels from the Greek, I think it's Greek, yeah. And it's because there's similar optics about them. And it is agreed that Matthew and Mark both used, Matthew and Luke both used Mark the first, and it's one of their primary sources. That's why there's so many similar sentences and phrases and so on. But Matthew and Luke, in different places in the early church, adapted it to suit their unique situations and their objectives. But there's a whole bunch of sayings and other material Matthew and Luke share. They're both in Matthew and Luke, but they're nowhere to be found in Mark. So there has to be another source which Matthew and Luke use a lot, and they obviously respect. But we don't have any traditional name for it, so there's no gospel up. It's so the scholar detectives simply made up a name, since they called it source, and since they were a lot of them were Germans, they called it source in German, Quelle, or simply Q. So here's why Matthew's Sermon on the Mount and Luke's Sermon on the Plain have so much in common. They aren't two different events, they're both using Q, drawing upon Q for what they consider reliable information on Jesus' teaching, 55 or 60 years after the actual events of Jesus' life. These detectives point their fingers at Q to clear up the mystery. Can't resist it. Q was their clue, their cue. Yeah. But nobody has a physical copy of Q. There simply aren't any in existence. Maybe there never were. Maybe it was simply word of mouth, a group of sayings that got memorized and passed from follower to follower over all those years. But what we can be sure of is that the Gospel of Mark didn't know about Q, else it would have been in there. So there's so many tantalizing cues. Okay, no more puns. But I bet you'll remember Q. Too serious for punning, really. It is the way you and I get to know about Jesus. The Jesus whom Q remembers and Luke represents is a revolutionary. Maybe you have thought that the message, this Jesus sermon plain, Mount, represents, turn the other cheek, give him your shirt also. Is that followers of Jesus should become mild-mannered milquetoast, just fade into the background, direct at us. Turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek. Well, one of our scholar detectives has something very interesting to say about this. He sees Jesus' words as instead of a surrender, a form of non-violent resistance to oppression. Now this is tricky. In the culture of the time, in the Palestine then, a person's left hand was used for what we might call bathroom functions. And that meant you'd never, ever strike a person with your left hand. Reserved, used. So if you were, or considered yourself, or were considered superior to another person, you'd strike them insultingly with the back of your right hand. Never with the palm of your hand, because that was what you did to equals. So Jesus is talking to victims here. So your oppressor will not see you as an equal. And he's likely to hit you with the back of his hand. Well, Jesus tells him, turn your face to the side. Remove the easy target. And you force your oppressor to see you as an equal. For even your oppressor won't use his left hand, nor the palm of his right hand. It just wasn't done. Turn the other cheek. Checkmate. The oppressor now demands your coat as a repayment for a debt, and you are poor. Now, interestingly, the rules again of the time demand that you could not leave a debtor naked at sundown. Right there in the rules. No matter what he or she owed you, just wasn't done. Give your oppressor your coat and your shirt too, and you stand there half naked. Whoops. Just as much a nonviolent resistance strategy as Martin Luther King's kneeling down with many brothers and sisters before water hoses and snarling police dogs. Well, it's just a little taste of the detective work, following their clues, following Jesus the revolutionary emerges, the fearless, persistent disturber, Jesus the disturber. Remember those words from Luke's Gospel? We started reading Luke's Gospel back in Advent and just before Christmas. Remember these words also from Luke's Gospel? He hath put down the mighty from their seat, and hath exalted the humble and meek, the non-violent. He hath put down the oppressors from their seat. Words from the Magnificat, from Evensong, from evening prayer, offered by Anglicans through the years, Sunday after Sunday, century after century after century. He hath put down the mighty from their seat, and hath exalted the humble and meek. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness,